Hi. I just wanted to take a couple moments to just capture my thoughts as they're popping up in my head because I got inspired by a really good analogy that I thought up about this just themes and things that I've been seeing going on. And this is in relation to a lot of the work that I do in diversity, equity, inclusion, and a lot of work I do about folks navigating interpersonal relationships. And I think it's something that's important. So let's talk about how to be a good ally, how to leverage one's privilege in spaces to make change. One of the things that I find very frustrating is the growing relationship and self growth and self improvement of making change. So I know this in my life, growing as a professional, growing as just like a human being and things like that, that certain things that kind of brought me solace or brought me comfort aren't necessarily the things that do the same today. Or I should say, those methods aren't as sustainable as I thought they were. So I think about the many people that I have had over my life, that I've interacted over my life, that I've worked over my life. And these are, I just want to say up front, are good folks. They're intentional folks. I want to just throw that out there. I'm not trying to bash or disparage people because I think trash talking people is not going to be effective in sustaining change. So when I'm talking about change, I'm talking about like social justice, systemic change. So I definitely have grown in embracing the values of decolonization in my work as an educator and as a therapist. So the principles of decolonization is basically acknowledging and recognizing how oppression is something that's pervasive today, and it stems from historic systems such as capitalism, colonialism, imperialism. And so these systems are responsible for a lot of suffering that has happened in the past and still continues today. So in my work as a mental health professional, I've learned to more intentionally bring into my practice acknowledging the systems of oppression that is are impacting people's mental health today. So that's the validation piece, which I find is helpful for a lot of folks because it acknowledges the fact like, okay, I'm not crazy, right? And it's not something of my own personal doing that I'm suffering, but it's just the impact of like, yeah, systems of oppression, racism, different types of isms, right? I can run down the list, right? That's coming from a systemic level that are harming folks and continue to oppress folks today. And we want to acknowledge that it's a systemic issue to validate folks' experiences and to externalize it. So a lot of times people think like, oh, there's something wrong with me, and it's like, no, it's because of the way society's treated you, right? So that's definitely helped in my mental health practice. There's a second part of this which I also want to carry over in my work as an advocate. So we can acknowledge that these systems are doing what they do and they have done what they've done, right? But that's only going to do so much, right? You're acknowledging someone's in pain, but you're not really taking the steps to help someone heal from the pain from a systemic level, right? So I'm not talking about the stuff I do individually with folks. Obviously, I do work individually with folks, right? But that only goes so far, right? Where it's like, obviously, you want to help folks kind of reclaim themselves in their lives, embrace their authenticity, embrace them, taking up space in places that historically are excluding them, right? Feeling that you're worthy of love, doing things you need to do to take care of yourself, as you're navigating this hard world. Right, that's obviously really important, right? But I think there's a second piece, and that kind of goes into my foundation, my discipline, social work, which is advocating for change, right? That there's only so much that an individual can do to take care of themselves, right? Why are we trying to heal the symptom of like, okay, let's heal these individuals on a day-to-day basis to take care of themselves, which is great, but let's also challenge and dismantle the systems that are causing this all in the first place, right? So, as a social worker, mental health professional, I am definitely the ones that are trying to challenge that and advocate for systemic change, right? And so that involves me a lot of speaking up in spaces, right? Using my privilege as someone that has access to certain spaces to speak up and to encourage change, right? So if there's certain policies or things that are there that are limiting people's rights, or things that should be there that can improve people's well-being, I'm going to speak up and voice those things. How about we think about this? How about we think about that? Maybe we should have a policy about this, right? What's the gaps, right, that we're missing that are negatively impacting these folks? All right. So I just wanted to give a background story about what I do on a one-to-one basis, because this is kind of going to go over to what I do when I'm talking about like my interpersonal relationships with folks outside of the individual counseling space. This is where you talk about allyship. This is where it's important, right? And I was talking about allyship. This is beyond kind of, I mean, it obviously involves white folks, right? But when I'm talking about leveraging privilege, I'm also talking about like myself, right? Like the fact that I said that I work in higher education, and so I'm involved, or I have invitation to be in certain spaces. And because of that, if we are talking about how do we cater to our students, for example, right? I can use the privilege as someone that's a professional in a space where the students aren't part of, right? To advocate for change on behalf of them, right? So that's what I'm talking about. Like that's me being an ally to the student population that I work for. Okay. So one of the things I want to talk about this allyship is that I've noticed that a lot of folks that want to be allies, right, they can do a really good job of validating the oppressed experiences, right? You know, one thing like about saying like, obviously I don't know how you feel exactly, right? Because I'm not affected, but I can validate and say like, yes, it makes perfect sense that you feel this way. You have every right to feel this way. This is a really shitty situation. So on and so forth. What I'm realizing though is that, you know, in the past that really was great for me to hear that validation because I wasn't getting that, right? Like there were a lot of spaces where like those things were just not acknowledged, right? And then sometimes it were, right? So I realize now more recently than ever that validation is only going to take you so far. That you can sit and validate someone's struggle, but what are you doing as an ally to speak up, to advocate for change, to support this person as they are speaking up themselves and advocating for the change? I think that is a huge blind spot that a lot of folks, well, I guess it's a blind spot so they're not realizing it, but that is a huge deficit. And so I'm realizing that I'm getting more frustrated because, you know, as much as I like to have like the support and the validation, it's like, how are you leveraging your privilege and your position to help advocate for change? I'm noticing this pattern like throughout, as I look throughout my life, right? These experiences. And sometimes, you know, I've seen folks, and I think it's because I've seen folks speak up and do it, and I see folks that don't. And so when you're in spaces where like you don't see anything about stepping up, you're thinking like, oh, just the validation is enough. But because I've noticed and I'm comparing my experiences throughout the life, I've seen people go a step further. I'm like, yeah, I actually really like that. You know, I feel much better when the person is validating my experiences, but also stepping up and using their privilege to advocate for change on behalf of me. Or when I am speaking up in certain spaces, that they have my back, that they are openly showing their support. That is a huge component, and I think is missing often a lot of times, right? And that sometimes people feel compelled to see like they want to support me, but they're not supporting me openly or consistently, right? Or they tend to do it only in certain spaces where, you know, you can come back and talk to me, make sure that I'm doing okay, which is fine. But if you're only doing it, you know, and one-to-one stuff, and change isn't happening, and it's because if we band together as a group, that would make more sense for us to speak up, then the one-to-one validation behind the back isn't really, or I should say behind the back, one-to-one validation isn't necessarily going to make any lasting change. So the analogy, you're probably wondering what the analogy was. It's something along the lines of, say like for example, I'm hurt, like I cut my leg or something, or I bump my leg really hard and I'm in pain, right? So validation would be, non-validation would be like people pretending like I'm not hurt, right? Or that I'm making up my symptoms, or it's not a big deal, minimizing it. Validation would be like, yeah, oh my goodness, like, if I say, oh yeah, I'm in pain, or like, am I making up, am I exaggerating, maybe it doesn't hurt that much. Validation would be like, no, like that makes sense, like you're totally hurt. I completely understand why you're hurt. It's this thing right there, right? Or the way that the system, maybe the room that's set up, it's like you can't avoid not getting hurt because you have to pass this thing and it ends up hurting your leg every single time. That's one thing. And then every time I mention I'm in pain, you go, yes, absolutely, I don't understand exactly what you're going through, but it makes sense that you're in pain. But the issue is that I'm still have the cut on my leg, or I still have the bruise on my leg, or whatever, right? So one step further would be like, let's all band together, especially if multiple people are seeing this and validating it. So let's all band together and say, and raise money to get me a Band-Aid or a bandage or whatever, or bring awareness to the folks who are in charge of structuring their environment to take away those obstacles or those things that are causing me pain in the first place. That's systemic change, right? Because to acknowledge someone's pain is one thing, but if you're working together to change the environment, right, or to heal the person, so they're not continuously in pain and pain and pain, that's the key part. That's, I feel like, is the thing that's missing. So I was like, oh, okay, this is a great thing that I had in my mind, and I just wanted to kind of communicate that. But those are some of my thoughts, and I'm noticing that too. It's kind of like, we can, like I said, obviously, taking care of one another, taking care of yourself is so important, right? But I still feel like at my point in my life, I'm very more interested in what are we going to do now? What are we going to do now to change? How can we band together to consistently make change? How do we band together consistently to advocate for change on behalf of these oppressed groups? So those are my daily thoughts for today. See ya later.